Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be diving into some really practical strategies for making actual change, not just talking
It's like
about it.
getting things done.
Exactly. So you guys send in some excerpts from Dan Heath's book, Reset, How to Change What's Not Working, and we thought it'd be awesome to do like a deep dive, really explore these ideas of finding leverage points, those spots where your effort really makes a difference.
Yeah. It's about going beyond the theory and actually putting things into action.
Yeah, totally. So Heath breaks his approach down into two main sections, right? The first one's about finding those leverage points, and then the second part's about shifting resources to actually make the change happen.
Right.
So let's start with the first part. Finding those leverage points, Heath lays out 5 key strategies, and that first one is go and see the work. And he uses this really interesting story about Karen Ritter, who was an assistant principal,
Right.
and she decided to shadow a student for a day.
Yeah. And what's so interesting is that Ritter, she thought she had a good grasp on the school environment, you know? But then she actually experienced a day in the life of a student, and it just totally changed her perspective.
It's amazing, right? She initially gave the school an A for supportive environment,
Wow.
but then after spending time in this grueling double-length remedial algebra class with the student, she realized just how disengaging and just soul-crushing these classes actually were.
Yeah.
It made me think, how often do we rely on these assumptions instead of actually observing what's happening?
It's so true. We all fall into that trap, and Heath calls it the accidental accretion of outdated habits.
Yeah.
We just keep doing things a certain way because that's how they've always been done, even if it's not effective anymore.
Right.
And he has this great example about a manufacturing plant where the main machine was shutting down every day at lunch because of an energy issue that they had fixed years earlier,
Oh, wow.
and no one had questioned it.
Really?
They just kept doing it.
What?
So just simply observing the work revealed this huge source of inefficiency.
That's wild. Okay, so good reminder to get out of our heads and into the real world, right?
Right.
Okay, so Heath's second strategy is consider the goal of the goal. Okay. And I actually experienced this firsthand buying my new truck.
Oh, yeah.
Afterwards, the dealership would not stop hounding me about giving them a perfect score on their customer satisfaction survey.
Oh, I hate that. They were so focused on the metric, the survey score, that they totally missed the point. The actual customer experience.
I know.
Perfect example of Goodhart's law.
Which is,
When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
wow, that's a good way to put it.
Right.
I was so turned off by the whole thing that I almost gave him a bad review just out of spite.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that.
So frustrating.
So Heath argues that we need to dig deeper, ask, what are we really trying to achieve here?
Yeah.
He uses the Eurostar project as an example.
Yeah.
They spent billions to shave 4 minutes off the travel time between London and Paris. But was that really the best use of resources to enhance the passenger experience?
Right.
Maybe investing a fraction of that in comfier seats or better amenities would have yielded more satisfaction.
Totally makes you think, right? What are we chasing?
Yeah.
Are we actually aligned with what we're trying to achieve?
Exactly.
Okay. So the third strategy is study the bright spots. I'm actually really curious about this one.
Yeah, so this one's about focusing on what's working instead of getting bogged down in what's not. So you find those instances of success, and then you figure out what makes them different.
I like that.
And there's this classic example from the U.S. Air Force. They were trying to design a cockpit for the average pilot, right?
Okay.
But then they realized there's no such thing.
Of course.
Every pilot has a unique combination of physical dimensions.
Right.
So by focusing on the average, they were actually designing for no one.
That's so interesting.
So instead of looking at averages, we should be
Yeah.
seeking out those bright spots where individuals are thriving.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Heath also uses this great story about animal shelters
Oh, yeah.
and this program called Return to Field.
I love this one.
It was this idea to sterilize healthy stray cats and then return them to their communities instead of keeping them in these overcrowded shelters.
Right. Which seems counterintuitive at first,
It does.
but it actually addressed multiple problems at once. So you had the overpopulation,
Yeah.
you had disease spread, and then you had the limited shelter resources.
So smart.
And the results were amazing. In some places, cat intake at shelters decreased by over 30%.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So it seems like studying the bright spots requires this willingness to challenge those assumptions and to look for solutions in these unexpected places.
Totally.
Okay, so leverage point number 4, target the constraint.
Okay, so this one, every system has a bottleneck, right, that limits its overall performance. Think of Chick-fil-A.
Okay.
They might have these long drive-through lines,
Yeah, they always do.
but they move cars through faster than almost any other fast food chain.
They do. It's impressive.
It's because they've meticulously optimized the speed of service at the order window.
Interesting.
So even though the line looks intimidating, the constraint, the point that slows things down has been targeted. So the experience is actually better.
Wow. So instead of trying to fix everything at once, we should identify that one like crucial bottleneck and focus our efforts there.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. I'm starting to see how all of these leverage points kind of connect to each other.
They do. They build on one another.
Yeah.
And Heath even applies this concept to personal relationships. He talks about this therapist who uses an activity called sticky note appreciations to help couples combat negativity bias.
Okay.
So by focusing on the positive, the constraint being the tendency to dwell on the negative, you shift the entire dynamic of the relationship.
That's powerful.
Right.
Okay, so what about the fifth and final leverage point?
Right. So the final one is to map the system. This is about taking a step back to see the bigger picture, understanding how all the different parts of the system interact and influence each other.
So it's not just about looking at the individual components, but understanding how they fit together as a whole.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does Heath illustrate this concept?
He tells this story of two colleagues who were working to improve job outcomes for low-income college graduates.
Okay.
They realized that just getting students through college wasn't enough.
Right.
They had to map the entire journey from graduation to employment and identify all those potential roadblocks along the way.
So it's like creating a roadmap of the whole process.
Exactly.
And what did their map reveal?
Well, they discovered that many students were struggling not because they lacked qualifications, but because they lacked guidance on how to actually navigate the job market.
Interesting.
So their solution was to create a high-dosage career counseling program that provided intensive individualized support to help students find and secure better jobs.
Okay. And did it work?
Incredibly well. Their first cohort of students saw a 100% success rate in securing better jobs.
Wow, that's amazing. It really highlights that power of mapping the system to identify those like hidden leverage points. I bet this approach could be applied to all sorts of challenges, big and small.
Absolutely. He gives the example of a hospital that was able to drastically reduce CT scan wait times by mapping the entire patient journey. They found all sorts of inefficiencies they never would have noticed otherwise.
Like what?
Well, like patients waiting unnecessarily for a contrast agent that could have been administered much earlier in the process.
Wow, so it's all about finding those like hidden opportunities for improvement.
Exactly.
But how do we actually go about mapping a system? What does that process look like?
That's a great question, and
Yeah.
that's what we're going to delve into in the next section. We're going to look at a few more examples of mapping systems in action, and then we're going to explore some practical steps that you can take to actually map your own systems and processes.
Okay, sounds good. Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and explore those practical strategies. Okay, so we've identified those leverage points, but just knowing where to push is only half the battle, right? Now we have to actually like figure out how to shift resources to support those changes. How do we get that momentum going?
That's where the second part of Heath's book comes in. It's called Restacking Resources. He offers 6 methods to make this happen, and the first one is all about front-loading your efforts. He calls it start with a burst.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. What does he mean by that?
Well, it's the idea that like a concentrated, intense burst of effort can be so much more effective than a slower incremental approach.
Yeah.
Think of it like opening a stuck window. It takes a lot more force to initially get it moving, but once it's unstuck, it's much easier to keep it sliding.
Yeah, that makes sense. Overcome that inertia.
Right.
Build some momentum.
Yeah.
And I can see how that would apply to like tackling a big project, It's tempting to try and spread things out, but maybe that focused burst of energy is the way to go.
Yeah, Heath uses this great example from ExxonMobil, this guy Matthew Nyes. He took over their technical data center, and he was faced with this like multi-year backlog of unarchived files.
Wow.
So it was overwhelming. But instead of chipping away at it slowly, he instituted all-hands archiving every Thursday morning.
Oh?
So the entire team would drop everything and just focus solely on archiving for that time.
So they created a dedicated sprint, basically,
Yeah.
to tackle this like mountain of files. That's a clever way to break through a daunting backlog. Did it work?
It did. They cleared that years-long backlog way faster than anyone thought possible. And think about the psychological impact, too. When you see that kind of tangible progress early on, it could really fuel your motivation to keep going.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sold on bursts. What's the next strategy for restacking resources?
Okay, the second one is recycle waste. And Heath points out that waste is often hidden within our habits and assumptions.
Yeah.
It takes a conscious effort to identify and eliminate it.
Yeah, I'm starting to see a theme here. It's all about like challenging that status quo and looking for those hidden inefficiencies.
Yeah?
Do you have a good example of recycling waste in action?
Yeah. The salad chain Sweetgreen is a great example. They redesigned their salad bowls to eliminate the need for separate metal mixing bowls, which saved them a ton of time,
Wow.
water, and energy. Literally recycled the waste of unnecessary washing and handling.
Wow, that's so simple yet so brilliant. It reminds me of when I reorganized my daughter's shoes and socks.
Oh, yeah.
It used to be just this chaotic mess every morning.
Hmm.
But just a few like simple adjustments made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about like buying more storage or anything. It was about rethinking that existing system.
Totally. And that's what Heath challenged us to do.
Oh,
Look for those forms of waste that might be hiding in plain sight in our own work or personal lives.
challenge accepted. Okay, so what's the third method for restacking resources?
Right. The third one is do less and more, which sounds a bit paradoxical at first.
Yeah, how can you do less and more at the same time?
Well, it's about being strategic with your effort. The idea is to invest more in high-value activities while simultaneously doing less of those things that drain your energy and resources without providing much return.
So it's like the 80-20 rule applied to productivity.
Exactly.
Focus on that 20% of activities that yield 80% of the results.
Yeah, Heath cites this consulting firm that helps businesses identify their most valuable customers and then reallocate resources accordingly.
Okay.
They often find that companies are over-coddling their worst customers while under-coddling their best.
That's fascinating.
Right.
It seems counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it.
It does.
Okay, are there any other examples of this do less and more principle in action?
Yeah, Heath shares this great story about Art Mollenhauer, who turned around a struggling Big Brothers Big Sisters chapter in Chicago.
Okay.
He had to make some tough decisions, cutting programs, even staff. But he also made strategic investments in areas that would actually drive growth and impact.
So he did less of what wasn't working and more of what was.
Exactly. And he revitalized the entire organization.
Yeah, so it's about being ruthless with your priorities, focusing your energy on what truly matters.
Yeah.
I like that. It's a good reminder to constantly reevaluate where we're spending our time and energy.
Okay, what about the fourth method?
The fourth one is tap motivation. Instead of trying to force change, the key is to actually tap into people's existing drive and passion.
Yeah, because when people are genuinely motivated, they're more likely to embrace change.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Heath gives this example of a therapist who uses a strengths-based approach to help a mother manage her child's ADHD.
Okay.
So instead of focusing on the child's challenges, she helped the mother identify and leverage the positive aspects of their relationship.
Interesting.
So by focusing on their strengths, it shifted the dynamic in a more positive and empowering direction.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
It's about finding those intrinsic motivators that already exist within people and then channeling them towards a common goal.
Yeah. What are some other ways to tap into motivation? Well, Heath talks about this concept called the genius swap, where team members actually trade responsibilities based on their interests.
Oh, I love that.
So this not only increases motivation, but it can also lead to greater efficiency because people are doing work that they're naturally passionate about.
Right.
I love that. It's about finding that sweet spot where individual passions align with the needs of the team or the organization.
Exactly. He also tells this really inspiring story about Diane Connery, who revitalized a dying library in Pottsboro, Texas.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story. That was incredible. What was her secret?
Well, Connery, she recognized that to save the library, she needed to tap into the community's energy and passion.
Yeah.
So she transformed the library into this vibrant community hub,
Yeah.
offering a wide range of programs and activities that appealed to this really diverse audience.
Yeah, from cooking classes to a library of things where people could borrow everything from bicycles to sewing machines.
Right.
It was brilliant.
She breathed new life into that library.
She did. And it all stemmed from tapping into people's intrinsic motivation. Instead of dictating what the library should be, she invited the community to be a part of that transformation.
Right.
And so by creating that sense of ownership and empowerment, she unleashed this wave of enthusiasm and support. That's powerful.
Now, okay, what about the fifth method for restacking resources?
The fifth one is let people drive. And this one is all about empowering people to take ownership of their work, giving them the autonomy to make decisions and drive progress.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that. I think micromanagement is one of the biggest killers of motivation and innovation. When you trust people to take the wheel, they often exceed expectations.
Absolutely. And it creates unnecessary waste.
Yeah.
Heath highlights this really fascinating example from the healthcare world. This Dr. Richard Gibney, he allowed his dialysis patients to perform self-dialysis.
Wow, that sounds radical. Did it work?
The results were remarkable. Patients who had more control over their treatment, they experienced fewer complications, and they reported much higher satisfaction. It just goes to show that empowering people can have a profound impact on outcomes and morale.
Yeah, totally.
Huh.
And Heath also connects this concept to coaching. He tells a story about this archery coach who learned to let athletes drive shifting from giving direct instruction to eliciting goals and providing guidance.
It's that shift from telling people what to do to empowering them to figure it out for themselves,
Yeah,
but within a framework of support and guidance.
exactly. The coach realized he couldn't shoot the arrows for his athletes.
Right.
He needed to empower them to take ownership of their performance.
Okay.
And Spotify has this great model for this. They call it high autonomy, high alignment.
I like that high autonomy, high alignment.
Yeah,
It's about finding that balance between freedom and direction, making sure everyone is rowing in the same direction while still having the autonomy to choose their own path.
exactly. It's about creating a culture of trust and empowerment.
Okay, do you have any other good examples of let people drive in action?
Yeah, Heath talks about T-Mobile's team of experts model. They completely transformed their customer service by giving specific teams ownership over customer relationships in defined geographic areas.
Okay, so instead of handling this random assortment of calls, these teams became experts in their assigned regions and built deeper relationships with customers.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Did it work?
It was a huge success. Customer satisfaction went up, employee morale improved, and costs went down.
So win-win-win.
Yeah.
Okay, so Let People Drive is all about empowering people to take ownership and make decisions. But within a clear framework of guidance and support, sounds like a winning formula.
It is.
Okay, what about the sixth and final method for restacking resources?
Yeah, the sixth one is accelerate learning. It's about getting better, faster feedback to fuel continuous improvement.
Yeah, and this is so crucial, especially in today's fast-paced world. The ability to adapt and learn quickly is essential for success. So how does Heath suggest we accelerate learning?
Well, he uses the example of the San Francisco 49ers. They installed fan feedback terminals throughout their stadium.
Interesting.
So they were able to collect real-time data on the game day experience, identify issues as they rose, and make adjustments on the fly.
Oh, wow. So it was like a continuous feedback loop,
Yeah,
helping them create a more enjoyable experience for fans.
exactly. And it's not just about collecting data. It's about using that data to make informed decisions and drive positive change.
Right.
And Heath emphasizes the importance of seeking feedback from the right people. He tells a story about how leaders at this manufacturing company, they quickly realized a flaw in their executive development program simply by role-playing it with a group of senior executives.
Interesting.
The feedback they received was invaluable and saved them a lot of time and money.
It's amazing how sometimes the simplest solutions can be the most effective.
Yeah.
Just ask the right questions and listen to the feedback. It seems like a lot of these strategies revolve around this idea of challenging assumptions and being open to new ways of doing things.
You're right. Heath also contrasts the traditional waterfall approach to product development, which is very linear and plan-driven, with the more iterative, agile methodology, which embraces flexibility and adaptation based on continuous feedback.
Right. So Agile is all about embracing change and iterating quickly.
Exactly. And he uses a great example from NPR. They moved away from the traditional pilot process for developing new shows, which was really slow and costly.
Okay.
And they embraced a more iterative approach, experimenting with different formats and gathering feedback along the way. This led to the creation of some of their most popular shows like TED Radio Hour and Invisibilia.
It's about being willing to experiment and fail fast.
Yeah.
Learning from those failures and iterating towards success. I think that's a crucial mindset in today's world.
Yeah.
Okay, to recap, Accelerate Learning is all about creating systems for continuous feedback and using that feedback to drive improvement and innovation. Okay, what about that final method?
Okay. The final method brings together many of the concepts we've already discussed. Heath calls it participative management. And it's about actively seeking out and acting on input from those who are closest to the work.
Yeah, because they often have the best insights.
Exactly. Heath shares a great example from a Brazilian hospital that actually empowered their staff to identify and solve problems. They used this really simple system of ping-pong balls to track progress.
Okay, how's that work?
Well, the staff would drop a white ball into a bin, if they felt like their shift was collaborative and participatory, and an orange ball meant the opposite.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like a visual representation of how things are going.
Exactly.
Very clever.
Did it work?
It worked incredibly well. They implemented over 93% of the ideas generated by the staff.
Wow.
And this example actually highlights how several of Heath's restacking resources methods can work together. So they started with a burst of activity involved letting people drive and used a simple system to accelerate learning.
It sounds like a recipe for successful change.
It is. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this section, exploring these 6 powerful methods for restacking resources. Starting with a burst, recycling waste, doing less A&D, more tapping motivation, letting people drive, and accelerating learning. What are some key takeaways you want our listener to remember from this section?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is that change doesn't have to be slow and arduous.
Right.
By focusing on those leverage points and strategically shifting our resources, we can create meaningful change much faster than we might think.
That's encouraging. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the prospect of change, but Heath's framework provides this clear and actionable path forward.
It does.
Well, we covered a lot of ground today, exploring Dan Heath's reset from identifying those leverage points to those 6 strategies for restacking resources.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But what really struck me was this idea that, meaningful change can actually happen a lot faster than we often assume.
It's true. It's easy to get bogged down in that change is hard mentality.
Yeah.
But Heath gives so many examples of these rapid transformations. It's really inspiring.
Totally. And he even uses the story of the I-95 overpass collapse in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah. Remember that?
The experts predicted it would take months to rebuild, but they managed to do it in just 12 days.
Amazing.
Talk about a burst of effort.
Right.
It just shows you what's possible when you challenge those assumptions about how long things should take.
Totally.
It's a good reminder that we don't need to wait for a crisis to spark that kind of action.
Right.
There are so many other examples in the book too, like that hospital receiving team that cleared a 3-day package backlog in just 6 weeks.
Oh, yeah. And the ExxonMobil team, the one that cleared that massive multi-year backlog of files.
Yeah.
With their weekly all-hands archiving sprints.
And of course, Diane Connery and her amazing turnaround at the Pottsboro Library.
Yeah, it's incredible how quickly things can shift when you tap into the right resources and leverage points.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive into reset, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to walk away with today?
I think it's this change is within our control and it can happen faster than we think. Whether it's a personal habit, a team dynamic, or even a larger system, we have the power to reset things that aren't working.
I love that. So much of what we've discussed today has been about shifting our mindset, from feeling stuck to feeling empowered to actually create that change.
Totally. And remember, it all starts with identifying those leverage points, those areas where our efforts are actually going to have the greatest impact, and then using those 6 restacking resources strategies to effectively direct our time, energy, and focus.
Absolutely. We've given you a lot to think about today, but now we kind of want to turn it over to you, the listener. What's one small but meaningful change you could make today to reset something that's not working in your own life?
Yeah. What's that one area where you've been feeling stuck? Is there a habit you want to change, a system that's driving you crazy, or maybe a goal you've been putting off?
Take a moment to reflect on what we've talked about today and see if any of those leverage points or restacking resources strategies resonate with you.
Remember, even small changes can have a ripple effect. Don't underestimate the power of one intentional reset.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Reset. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing for a better tomorrow.